Hey, everybody, welcome to this episode of Think Business Live. Looking forward to talking with Jason Byer. Jason, it's great to connect with you. Think Community, looking forward to diving into talking about branding. Jason is the head of marketing and partnerships at a company called Crowdspring.com. Like every episode, as many of you know, I'm a business coach. I work with everybody who are successful and are stuck and want to get unstuck. And Jason's going to share with us ways to get unstuck in our business when it comes to branding. They work with, like I work with, solopreneurs to Fortune companies and everything in between, not only on branding, but also design. Jason, it's great to connect with you. Let's talk about branding for a second, because I think sometimes people get confused what branding is versus what marketing is. And, then there's like PR, but let's talk about what comes first, the chicken or the egg, the branding, the marketing, like just kind of define that a little bit.
Absolutely. Well, let's start with, because we get this question a lot, because let's start with the actual definition of branding and brand identity, right? We understand what marketing is, but branding, we kind of think typically is just relegated to the large companies. Amazon has a brand, Starbucks has a brand. Maybe I have a successful business, but I'm not competing in that space. A brand is quite simply every single interaction that somebody has with your company. It's every interaction. Okay, that's all it is. That's a brand. So it's how quickly you respond to voicemails, right? It's your after hours customer support. It's your return policy. It is your pricing. Are you the cheapest provider, or you're focusing on a more affluent group? This is your brand, right? So it's every single interaction. A brand identity is everything visual about your business and your brand, right? And so this is your logo, the colors on your website, the fonts that you choose to use in your email communication. All of these visual aspects are part of your brand identity, which is nestled under your overarching brand, right? Yeah. And so you can do marketing without a brand. It's just not as effective, right? You're just kind of making things up as you go. It's not very cohesive. We would call it on brand. When you see certain communications that come from large companies like Apple, right? You have a certain expectation of what that email is going to look like, what that presentation is going to be, what the price point of the product is going to be, right? Because they're focusing on what their brand is, who they're trying to communicate with. It's easier to look at these large companies because they interact with our daily lives so often. But if you're running a successful company in the cleaning business space, or lawn care, or professional services like you with coaching or legal services, you have to identify, who's this audience that we're talking to? And, is it an affluent audience? Is it an audience that's just getting started? Yeah. And then how am I different? Right. And that difference is what we're building into the brand. If you're going to focus on being very customer centric, then everything about your brand needs to stem from that mantra.
Yeah. Let's talk about, one of the ways I define branding is your brand is what people say about you when you leave the room. And I think that right. It's really important. And I think, as companies and as individuals, we can control our brand, right? And so it starts with, I think, simple messaging. I see, Jason, something that I see in companies that I work with and companies that I don't, that I observe. Sometimes their branding is confusing because their messaging is so confusing. And so talk about, getting to simple, and I think it's challenging. I think a lot of times companies don't take enough time or work with companies like yourself to focus on their brand, to get to simple, and then they just get confusing. So can you kind of just chat about that a little bit?
Sure. I think one of the challenges here is, some of the groups you work with, they're successful. They've been operating for multiple years, maybe multiple decades. And we typically get into a rhythm of how things are and how they just always have been. And we don't quite look at, well, who's the customer that, pays on time all the time, right? Who's fun to work with, who refers other businesses. This is a great way to start to understand, who do I actually want to work with and who actually wants to work with us? That's kind of the first part of branding, right? Because then it helps us understand a lot of us have businesses that we can work with many different customers, but there's a subset of those that are our best customers. And that's really what we're trying to understand, because as you mentioned, the way you define branding and the way others like, Steve Jobs have defined branding is it's what people say about your company when they're not in the room. You want to know who those people are, right? Specifically, what are their job titles? What are their industries? Because then you can understand their pain points and you can craft your brand around that. So as an example, if you understand that, your customer is a small business owner just getting started, right? What are their challenges, right? Well, their challenges are anxiety and overwhelm and fear of failure, right? Yes, they want to make money. Revenue is kind of that external goal that they're trying to reach, but there's a lot of internal goals that are causing problems. So how can you differentiate in your service product offering where you're helping to solve some of those core internal challenges? Yeah. And so one of the kind of easy ones to think about that a lot of companies adopt is just great customer service, right? How can we make your interaction with us so seamless that we turn kind of a boring interaction into something that you really enjoyed? We get this at Crowdspring a lot. Design and branding is not necessarily a fun project because most of the people tasked with this, the business owners and sometimes even the marketers, don't have experience in this, right? They don't have experience as designers. And so there's a lot of overwhelm, there's fear, there's anxiety. And a lot of the reviews, and we publish these publicly, people say, look, this was a fun process. It was fun getting dozens of different custom designs, getting different ideas together. And for us, that's a strong signal that we've hit a bit of positioning that other competitors aren't looking at, this ability to create kind of a fun engagement in what could otherwise be a very stressful and high anxiety situation.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's talk about kind of step one of marketing, of branding. Step one, a company is looking at their current branding, and step one is when they sit back as an observer and they say, we need to evolve this strategy. Step one is what?
Step one is really understanding where you're currently at, because it's different for every business, right? And so, where are we at? Where do we want to go? Essentially is what it comes down to. We want to understand, we don't want to just start throwing out tactics. We don't want to just start saying, we need to be on more social platforms. Why? Are you not on the platforms now where your current audience is? Most social platforms don't work for every audience that you have. So just coming up with the goal that, what, we're going to be on LinkedIn. Well, if your customer or your ideal customer isn't on LinkedIn, that's a waste of time, right? And so you really want to understand, where are we at currently? Where are we trying to go? Where are we failing, right? Where are we failing to hit this customer or this prospect? And that really is the foundation. And then from there, we can build tactics. I think the biggest challenge that marketers and business owners have is that we just look at busy work and label it as marketing and progress. Most marketing is not going to work. Okay. That's just a fact. We want to get to that realization just as quickly as possible, right? We don't want to waste any time. And so one of my pet peeves is seeing businesses where they have, 5 different social presence for their company. And each one is very haphazard and doesn't have a lot of substance. And I don't like this because it kind of gets into the mind of the psyche of the company, that they're trying to kind of spread themselves out. They have no strategy. So they're just going to participate on every platform, and they're going to do just a little bit everywhere, which means they're really not speaking to anybody, right? So step one is really understanding where you're at, what's working and what isn't, because then you can start to craft that brand strategy. Then you can understand, are we trying to target an affluent audience or a first-time user, somebody on a budget?
I love that. So how'd you get into this business, Jason?
I met the CEO about 7 years ago. We were working on a startup lab where we create multiple companies, build the brands around those companies, and spin them off. And Crowdspring was one of these companies we were working together with. And so it was kind of a natural fit. Really enjoy working with the team. And the goal has always been to create a lot of content and education around branding, because as we started the conversation with, there's a lot of confusion. What does this mean for my business? And unfortunately, this is the secret sauce, the magic bullet that most businesses are missing. And essentially, it's fairly simple to get started. It's an ongoing process. Just because you have a 30-year-old company doesn't mean you continually look at your brand and see how it evolves and how you want to grow it. It's something that we're constantly doing, every couple years.
Yeah. When it comes to, looking at, when you say every couple of years, how often should a company be, paying attention to the branding, paying attention to the tea leaves, paying attention? I mean, we're in a market right now. We're in a I think a decade right now where we're going to see continual things adjusting and moving and changing at rapid speed. So what is the shelf life for a brand today?
So you have to look at what you currently have, because it could be that you're already 10 years outdated, right? And you need to start like tomorrow fixing this problem. Because, if you think about, let's go back, 2 decades, the brands that we saw in the early 2000s, they weren't cringeworthy to us. They were just normal, right? But you go back into, the Wayback Machine and you look at, the websites and the brands from 20 years ago, and you're like, oh my God, you're just cringing. They look terrible, right? There are businesses out there right now that haven't improved much beyond that. And while they, see this and they say, well, it's fine. We offer a great product and a great service. We as consumers are judging those products, right? And so think about how you purchase. If you go to a site and, they don't have their HTTPS and it gives you a big warning that, hey, your information might be stolen on the site. What do you do as a consumer, right? You abandon ship. You're like, it's not worth it. In the very least, what brands are trying to do is they're trying to prevent doubt that you're the best person to work with, doubt that your product is going to be the solution that they need. That's what this brand is trying to do. It's trying to push somebody to the next level. We're trying to say, when you land on the homepage, we want you to go to a category page. We want you to learn about our service. When you learn about our service, we want you to get a lead magnet, or we want you to schedule a demo or a call. When you schedule the demo or the call, we want you to maybe sign up right then, or maybe the next step to that process. It's all little things that we're trying to move you through this conversation, through this funnel. And that's why the brand has to be just on point at each of those steps. You can't have a beautiful landing page, but then have customer service folks that, never return phone calls, right?
Yeah.
Or a product that breaks. And so when we're talking about, when to look at rebranding and refreshing, it's important to look today, because you might be in this problem where everything just looks outdated. Get feedback from your clients and customers and people around you to understand this. Otherwise, if you're pretty happy and your customers are pretty happy with where you're at currently, every couple years, you're going to want to look to refresh this brand identity. It doesn't mean you're doing an overhaul, right? It may just mean you're modernizing the layout of your website or your visual assets or your fonts just a little bit.
Yeah.
More often that, or more years after that, maybe you're redoing your logo, right? You're making it a little bit more modern and focused on your audience. You're also thinking about the direction of your products and services. If those are changing or evolving, if you were just cabinets 10 years ago, but now you're doing, some other custom cabinetry as well as cabinets, obviously you need to update that name, the branding, the logo, and things like that. But we're doing this on a regular basis. And in between these steps, you should always be test the positioning statements, kind of that top left hero on the website, how you describe your business and who you're for should be something that you're testing regularly.
Yeah, I love it. All right, quick speed round. Book that's had the biggest impact on you.
John, can you hear me?
Yeah. Well, quick speed round. What's a book that's had the biggest impact on you?
John, you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Could you hear me?
I can. Yep.
Yeah. What's a book that's had the biggest impact on you?
Oh, Why We Sleep, Matthew Walker. I literally implement everything for 8 hours a day, every day.
Yeah.
So it's.
I just saw that book on my recommended book list.
It made the circuit several years ago, and I'm glad I was kind of early to kind of listen to this, because it's literally been life-changing to implement some of those aspects because better sleep means, better lifestyle, better, feeling, health, wellness, business.
So what does he talk about in the book?
So it's about building certain habits. It's the impact of certain things that you feel are not a big deal. They get into this really interesting case study on that happens to billions of people twice a year, right? Where we change our clocks forward and backwards, and the impact to our health, because when we move the clock backwards, we lose an hour, and we typically don't adjust. We go to bed at the same time, we wake up at the same time. We just got an hour less of sleep. And they found that heart attacks and car accidents increase the day after. Every single year that happens. And the inverse is true. When we gain that hour, we still don't change any of our routines, but we gain an hour of sleep. Heart attacks and car accidents actually go down that next day, and it happens every year.
Wow.
And so that is fascinating, just like 1 hour and how that impacts kind of our health and well-being. Obviously, we want to be as healthy as possible. And it's a bunch of little things like that showing, the importance of sleep. Yeah. Impacts of caffeine and alcohol on sleep. And yeah,
that's crazy. All right. Best, thanks for sharing that. Best piece of wisdom you've ever received. Best piece of wisdom you've ever received. I'm not sure why I keep on jumping in and out.
John, you there?
Yeah, I am. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm not sure I keep on jumping in and out, but let me just close it by say this. It was great talking to you about branding. I'm not sure if you can hear me or not, but it was great talking to you about branding. Think community. If Jason can help you, check out crowdspring.com. And if I can help you with any of your coaching needs, check out jondwoskin.com. Jason, any last thoughts on branding?
No, really excited for the conversation.
Right,
thanks,
good.
John.
All right. Thanks, everybody.